There we go, that's a bit of an introduction. Well, hello, I think that's probably the first place to start is hello, and thank you very, very much for a warm welcome here today. I think the biggest thank you goes to, obviously, Western Bay and the support that you've been giving me, and it's sad that Karen can't be here today because she was my biggest connection, that my #1 fan seems to be, but I'm thinking of her loads, and I'm very grateful to be here. I suppose the first thing is probably to do is just to introduce myself, I guess, because some of you may know me, some of you may not, and I'm based in Cardiff, so I live in Cardiff, and I have 2 adopted children that we adopted through the Cardiff agency. A couple of caveats, I suppose, before I start talking. I have no real gender. I've made a couple of notes, but that's just because my memory is just all over the shop at the minute. That's a different story. But I just wanted to have the opportunity just to say that I guess I've been there, I've done that, I suppose, to some extent. So the little bit of background is that we actually adopted now 10 years ago. Well, my daughter's been home 10 years next month. So we started going through the process about 11 or so years ago. Now I know, and everybody will tell you should have every single date etched in your mind, and I can't remember most of them. So I can't remember what happened in what order and when and where. So it's a little bit vague, but some of that is the time that's passed since. So a little bit of background. So I've been with my husband. We met in 2005. And we decided along the way, like people do, we've got this connection, it was what it was going to be, and we started our road to trying to create our family. Everybody in the room will be in completely different circumstances, so I'm not going to go into any of that, but that wasn't something that worked for us, and we looked at lots of things over lots of years, and we were always open to adoption, so there was always something there. But if I'm totally honest, it wasn't the first thing that we thought about. It wasn't by any means a last option, but it wasn't the first thing the route that we went down. But we did. So some of the things that I'll talk about, you'll notice that I don't necessarily talk some of them about timings. A lot of that is because we know that we were actually quite fortunate at the timings of when we adopted. So we've actually got 2 children now. So we first adopted in whatever year, 10 years ago, and then we also have a son, and he's now 6, and he's been with us for nearly 6 years. So we've adopted twice over that time scale, and they're not birth siblings. So we, from as much as we could have known, obviously anything can change, from the circumstances of our daughter's adoption, we didn't think there would be an opportunity that a birth sibling would be an option along the way, but of course we were just open to anything as we went along. So first of all, things have changed significantly since we adopted. Significantly in terms of where we were and where we caught things where there were a position where there were far more children than adopters, so it kind of does this kind of thing, and for whatever reason at that time, a lot of it because obviously legislations have changed, laws have changed, rulings are changing, but at that time that wasn't the case for us. So we did find that the process for us was quite smooth and was quite quick, and I know that's not the case for many. So I'm not going to talk about those kind of things because everything is different in that respect. But what we do have is I have a kind of ruling to say that I will only talk about things that A, they already know themselves because obviously they're older, and B, that I would be okay for them to know about one day. So obviously, those are the 2 things, because I find that hugely important. And people are very, very, very open these days, especially social media. Some of the people, and I follow a load of people because I learn from everybody every day. But I find that some people share a considerable amount about their circumstances, their children in particular, and the types of things that are going on. And I just try to go on the basis that if I asked my child if they were okay for that to be there, how would that go? So obviously there are some things that I talk about today that I won't include. But please do ask me anything at any time, because I don't want to, and if I can't answer, then I will tell you. But if there's anything that you want to know, then along the way. I suppose the main thing I wanted to get out of today is just to give you a little bit of, possibly a bit of reflection. I know obviously I'm considerably further down the line, but possibly things that, it's not that we would have done differently, but things that I wish that we had spent more time with our children, especially after they were placed and the first few years. Some of that was because things have changed and we weren't necessarily guided at that time to do the things that people are guided to do now, and I can't really make back that time, and that's quite difficult because things have changed, I think, in the way that things are positioned to adopters these days, and also I guess some of the things that aren't always so smooth, because there is no scenario of any parenting in any shape or form that is smooth. So as I said, you'll all be at different stages, but just to give you, I suppose, that's just our brief kind of overview, a little bit of background. Through things like the assessment themselves, again, I know people will, I think, are pretty much there. I honestly quite enjoyed them, and I know people will find different things and say different things, and you hear different words, and I've often heard words and I think I didn't find it like that, and that's, so words I think maybe are bandied around sometimes about intrusion and overload and these kind of things. I genuinely didn't find that, and I think the main thing I held in close the whole time through is that the social workers have the life of a child in their hand. So there's no opportunity for there to be any gaps. So you ask me anything that you want to ask me, because you have a life you're holding in a hand that needs to be put somewhere safe. So you can ask me absolutely anything. And actually I find it quite therapeutic. I don't know if I feel a bit odd. I don't know if anybody else felt exactly the same way. I actually found it quite... And bearing in mind, as I said, I'm not going to go into that, but there were years and years and years and years, and a lot of heartbreak and a lot of loss and lots of things before we got to this point. But I did genuinely find, apart from a lot of writing, because it was all words to write, that actually, and it really did. There is no question how I looked is that you don't go through any other process where somebody comes out of it and says, actually, you're going to be a really good parent. So nobody really knows what they're going to do, but going through the assessment process was the best thing I could have come up with that told me that actually I could probably do this, because we all think sometimes that we can't and we don't know what's going to happen. But actually somebody said it, and they stamped us and they said, I think actually after all the things we found out about you and all the things, I think you're going to cut this parenting job, I think you can do that. And that doesn't happen very often. And it's just another way that I tried to think about it when I was writing my 10,000th question of the months that were along the way, is that that's really quite significant. And we did grow very strong as a couple. Again, it can be, and I think if you don't through the assessment process, then the road ahead is quite tricky. And I think it's quite a test of relationships, obviously, and relationships, whether or not that be adopting as a couple, a single adopter with your support networks, because they can be challenging too. So, we did have I see, you're doing that, I see, right, okay. So even from people that were supportive, so whoever it is, the in-depth of the assessments is there for that purpose, to say that actually I think you sound as good a chance here now to be able to do it. And I found that quite overwhelming, actually, from not being able to be in that position to then be able to say, do you know what, someone thinks that we can do it, so we're good to go. We can at least work through that. As I said, you'll all be at different things. I don't know if people have been to panels and done different things. I guess if you have, I hope that you found it wasn't as daunting as... Well, it was daunting. I'm not going to say it wasn't daunting, it was daunting. It was daunting. The prospect of it was daunting, because exactly the same scenario, as I said, and I just remember thinking, I've gotten sit here with these 12 people, and obviously I know there's a few, but they're going to make the decision about us and our future, and they've never met us before. And they see us for minutes. There was these small amount of minutes that had, I don't know, again, it could well be different now, so bearing in mind I'm talking 10 odd years ago when we went through this, and I just thought, gosh, that these people who have to interpret us from, you know, this document and the support that we've got and the way that our social worker is portraying us, that's a huge responsibility. But again, it was okay. One thing I did think about, I remember there was a story where one of my referees, so we chose a couple of friends, like really close friends, that we chose, and she phoned me in absolute panic because our social worker had been to see her, and she went, "I'm just so sorry, I think I've messed up totally," because I told her we really like to go out, drink, and she's like, "I'm so sorry, and she was beside herself, and she was like, I think I said the wrong thing about wine, and I can't take it back because I said it," and she wrote it down because I saw her, but it's not going to be a thing that is just, "I'm so sorry," and I was a bit, oh, okay, so it's not as bad as we think, it's not as if we're trying to work it through. And then I really I get, you know, these things, and then it's just something normal. It's what people, and it was like, you know, when I talked, so I did phone my social worker in a bit of a panic, going, "We've got a panel in the next week," and I said, "My friend says I like wine." And she was like, "It's just your release. It's your release. One of the best support networks you can have, are close friends who you can go out with and just do whatever it is that you used to do, and you can still do those things. So don't worry." And that's what I realised about the panel was a bit like that. It doesn't, and the fact that I had no idea, and I think there was a question along the lines of, and in assessments later on, about what would you do if you can't get your child to sleep, or some practical things. And I'm thinking, I don't really know until I'm in it. So I'm going to try and then what you're going to, what will you say? This could have been a bit later on when we were doing it for the second time. Again, forgive me, it got a bit fuzzy, and after 10 years. What's your impact? What will happen if your child turns around and says, "I hate you, you're not my real mum"? And I'm like, I literally have I can't answer that question. So obviously you can give me the books to tell me what sorts of things, but I don't think anybody can answer that question. And I remember saying, I can't tell, I don't know. I'll be devastated if I'm honest, if that happens, but I don't really actually know how I'll deal with that. And to be honest, I still don't, and I'm getting a little bit of it now if I'm honest. So I'm still, okay, I'm 10 odd years in, but I'm learning every single day, as any parent does, about anything. So I do remember those kind of things that you're getting to a certain point where your social worker will guide you, but yeah, some of those things, they're not the end of the world if those things happen. And I just wish I had more opportunities to do the release bit that I've actually got, because that doesn't actually happen very often. So I'm going to just scoot on again, just very briefly. It's only just to give you a bit of an overview of where we're at, and I'll lead on a little bit more about what I've done since. But we were, as I said, I'm going to use the word fortunate. I don't like the word lucky, but we were fortunate in that things did move on quickly. And we were matched. Our daughter was actually only 6 months old. So we had introductions were fairly short. And I don't know, again, this is the sort of thing about the hindsight thing. I don't know whether or not that was right or wrong or not or what. But we were sort of like a week in, and then that was it. That was kind of like, right, we have a baby now. And we had a baby who was absolutely and utterly adored by foster carers, as they are, quite rightly. But she was still sleeping in the room in the night with the foster carer, so that was quite a tricky transition, because she was there with her 24/7, and she was just amazing, but highly experienced, 25 odd years in, gazillions of, I don't know, she'd lost count of how many children had come through and gone. But she had a particular connection, and that was tricky. That was a tricky manoeuvre. And one of the things in particular that has moved on significantly since we adopted, and quite rightly, is we had very little information about what that would look like, what it would actually look like when you got them home. And not afraid to say we were under the misconception that things would be easier because she was a young baby, and it was never really put, I have to be totally honest, it was never really talked to in loads of detail about what we might expect. But things weren't so smooth. You can connect better with because obviously a baby needs a comfort element that perhaps older, in some other ways. But that was my first realisation. We were about two or so weeks in, and then we were in this beautiful, blissful bubble, and then all of a sudden she just stopped laughing and giggling and stopped going to the toilet and stopped looking at us and stopped doing all of these things, and we were just like, holy moly, we just weren't. So where now you're fully prepared, I think, for those kinds of things. They do happen, but you can work through, there's obviously lots of support and everything out there to work through them. So scooting along a few years, and we did adopt for a second time. So that was called 3 years later, we think we started. Whether or not it was the right time or not, I don't think anybody can answer that question. And we did again have questions sort of like, why are you, you've got what you've always wanted, why are you, why are you doing it again? Why are you doing it again? I guess. But again, and I think at that time, I suppose we were thinking a little bit more about us and our family unit. I think now the emphasis is far more on the child. But having said that, one thing that I do value and I do take very close to my heart, and I hope you don't mind me saying this, those professionals in the room, is that it is okay to be very, very happy and joyous about what you've got. And I'm finding some things that are happening recently, and again on social medias, where I am hugely respectful, involved, with our birth families. We unfortunately don't have contact. I'll just mention that a little bit on. But the fact that we think that this is the best thing that's ever happened to us is okay, because we can't live our lives under a shadow for our children. They deserve us to feel the joy and the happiness that we do, and to show them and share it with them. And that doesn't mean that for 1 second that we don't value their birth families, because without them there's no us. But it is okay to be happy. There seems to be a little bit of a shadow. I feel a little bit of a shadow rippling around at the minute, where you've got to sort of like but I couldn't tell you the joy and happiness and love it brought me, and I'm okay to say that out loud, and that doesn't mean to me that I'm feeling disrespectful to the place that they came from and their history and their heritage. That's up to us to keep that alive, but we do live in the moment, and we do live in all the stuff that happens, and I feel that that's okay. And I'm sorry if because I feel that that's a bit of an undercurrent at the moment. And just in case anybody's picked up on those kind of things, I tell everybody how wonderful my family is and the way it is. Sorry, I'm going to chuck there. So anyway, we did adopt a second time, and again we were in a position where it was, and it's worked out. And again, our son was under 1 when he came home, but it was very different. We couldn't give all the dedication in the same way, possibly, that we could, and that was quite a challenge and a little bit tricky as we went along. Introductions were difficult to manage because we had nursery pickups, and when we did them, I still had to be there early in the morning and late at the night, and it was just all these different things to juggle. And I think the reality is, the second time around, our connection took a lot longer to build, because we weren't just in that concentrating moment, and we're still working on it. They're a bit like chalk and cheese, but of course that means we've got 2 histories, we've got 2 life stories, we've got 2 different things going on. I will say even now, this family of 4, it's a work in progress. It is a work in progress. There is a lot to do to work around it, but equally I would say I wouldn't change anything for a gazillion years as to how it would be. so I don't talk too much. I don't know how long you want to go to do. So a few things that I don't know, pointers aren't right, because everybody's got their very own individual circumstances and their own individual things that go there. We, at the time when we adopted the first time, there wasn't a huge emphasis on contact, if I'm honest. It was just the timing of where it all was. I'm talking 10 odd years ago. So it was a bit like, are you okay to do a letter here? 12 months? Yeah, great, okay. And if I'm honest, I didn't really question it. I didn't even take it. Was just wasn't there. We were asked about if there was a possibility to meet birth family. Would you? And again, I was a bit like, I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. I hadn't really had much information and had it talked through. It actually, for us, it wasn't recommended because of location. So we adopted within our area, so it wasn't really deemed as something that would be appropriate. So they were sort of like, that was all, but that was it. My daughter is now 10. You can imagine the sorts of things that have developed over the years, and I would do anything to be able to say to her I met them. And I really would, because she asks me the questions and I have no answers. We actually had quite a lot of unknowns in my daughter's history. And she asked the questions and I have no answers, and I never make an answer up. That's my rule. I never kind of even try and make an answer to make it fit. I have to tell her I don't know the answer to that. I also don't tell her, again, I don't know, this is just me personally, I don't tell her now at this age that maybe one day we can try and find out, or we could try and do that, because I don't want her to live the next few years with that in her mind, and it might not be something that could happen. At the right time, I'll tell her we can do that, hopefully. I don't know, but then, don't know. But, so it's not to suggest anybody should do it, but that's one of the things that, when I look back now, if I'd have had that opportunity and it had been safe, and that I was being guided to do it, then I really wish that we would have been able to have that opportunity. That's the first thing. Also, the second thing is that we have no contact with foster carers. So when we again, this is what happened at that time. It was sort of deemed, and it's just progression. I've got no regret, no questions, fingers pointed, no whatevers. At that time, it was actually a bit like, and actually the taking my daughter away from the foster carer was a highly traumatic experience. It would never be like that now, because the foster carer was going on the basis I'm never going to see her again. It was the foster carer's emotions which we were managing. Obviously our daughter was young as well, so she didn't really, but it was highly traumatic because there was no ongoing contact talked about with foster carers in terms of direct contact. So we do a Christmas card, and we do a birthday card. She has sometimes, but not all times. So and again, that's something that is hard to make up, but obviously now things are different. But it was on the basis that it would be quite hard for the child. I don't know if that, I'm talking that minutiae, and things have just changed. But so I guess that is what it is. I don't dwell on it. And then my son's foster carer was later on, but actually she ended up, and we did have one meet with her, instigated through it, we arranged it, and then unfortunately she stopped fostering and then stopped contact from that point. So these things happen, so although the kind of like blue sky scenario would be, things do happen and they just don't. So we have very little contact. We have no reciprocal contact from birth family at all. So we do a letter once a year, which we've done obviously since the beginning, and it just goes on a file. It's not, we get nothing back, and it's not asked for. So again, these things, those things are tricky now. At the time, I was just sort of like, going on. But as I said, that's my hindsight, and I guess that's the hindsight of why the process has changed along the way, and the need to. So we do our letters. But what I have done, and again, when we started our letters, it was very factual, keep to the milestones, keep to the development points about what your child is, try not to make it too personal. So our first letters were along those ilk, because that's what we were sort of like. But we are fit, you know. But now we do our own thing. We go lots of information in there, their favourite things, all the stuff, in the hope, I guess. But that has been my mindset too. I hope one day they feel that they can access them, and I have to just. Every letter we write now, we go on the basis that what would they really want to know? What would they really want to know? Because I really, really hope that one day that they will read them. I have no answer to that. They're there waiting in case they do. What we are going to start doing now, and again we're getting some guidance on this, is to start to. So I want my daughter to write her birth mother a letter, so I'd like her to start putting some things together herself. She'll know that, but again, we have to just be tricky because obviously we know at the moment it's not going to go to her. So we have to just be very careful, so we're getting some help and guidance. As I said, I'm literally 10 years in and I'm still every day is a learning day, because I'm still just something, as it is with any parenting though, to be able to see. So those are two things probably. And then the last thing possibly, I don't know, is, again, everybody says different things about what they did and whether or not they adopted their children or didn't, or who, or in what environment that they were in. We were actually very closed. We took the proud but private route. So I wouldn't go into a room of people and go, ta-da, I'm here at a playgroup today and I adopted this and my daughter, again, it was a little bit of guidance, but a bit of, I just have to gauge a connection with someone, and it's a bit like I don't know, because I haven't been there, but I wouldn't go, you know, people X number of years later will be the first thing that they say is that I was in labour for 36 hours and I had a cesarean, this is my child. So I know it's a little bit flippant to say that, but it's like, that's not the first, like I don't need to tell you necessarily why I'm the mum of this child. I don't need to tell you necessarily until, as and when, that time feels right. And I've always gone on that basis. So you might be guided, sorry if you are, to be more open about it. But but of course, that puts pressure on you. Because I used to walk into a room and I go, I'm going to a playgroup today, I don't know what to say. If anybody asks me about the birth, I don't know what to say. And those feelings are real. What I would say is just have, you know, you've got to gauge it on your own, but have some stock answers. I had everything, every question that they could ask me, I had it ready. And I never lied. So if somebody asked, because I knew, I say I never lied, I gave factual information. So if they asked, well, who did that, you know, or a bit about the birth, well, I did know about the birth, because we did have that information. So I could, if I felt like it was really necessary, I could share that without it feeling like I was trying to do something. I just obviously would never ever say that it was me that I did that bit. And I'm really, again, we pride ourselves on being open and honest, and that's open and honest with our family, our children, and our surrounding, you know, support network, because it's important for them to know. I can't tell you the amount of times, even now in 2023, where it comes about and somebody will still say to me, oh, do you know much about the real family? And I still get that all the time. I still get that all the time. I say, well, but I get that a lot. You still get it, and part of what I do and why I've developed what I do is to try and educate people, but I can't do it by one. So I choose not to say these things to some people, because the response that comes back, I can't educate you in that 2 seconds that I've just met you and I've just told you I've adopted my children, and you've given me that comment which is just off the scale, and I now have to sit down and tell you why you shouldn't do that. And I know I should probably do that, because otherwise we're never going to get anywhere in this society, in the community, but I can't do that with you because I don't know anything about you and I haven't developed anything, and I don't feel like I can do it in that moment. And also, they will do it completely in front of your children. The things that have been said in front of my children, I'm just like, you just can't even imagine. And I'm sorry to say that, but it happens even now. And then the other reason is because I do, and it is a cliche, and you do find it, and it is a bit of a cliche about that it is their story, but it is massively important. Like I said, I'm only saying things to you or to anybody that I do that they already know or that they are going to know, just that we haven't quite worked out the age-wise to do it. And it's very telling. So my daughter has just got this, they're like chalk and cheese. So if we'd have done the same, we did the same approach with both of them, my daughter just all over it, lovely. My son just doesn't want to know. So they're a bit like chalk and cheese. He has some other behavioural things that are coming to light, which you don't know when they're young. So you pile all this information on them, and then they're not appropriate, they can't take it all in, and you don't know that until you go a bit further on. So you have to kind of we gauge them, and we actually approach it quite differently for the two of them, because you don't know at that time. So a lot of, I'm not sure if this is the right way, it's just my way and the way we've done it. We've always done a slow and steady approach to what we tell them and what we share. Rather than just all out there. And actually, in hindsight, for us that worked okay because my son would not be able to deal with that. My daughter would have been absolutely fine. My son can't take that. He's not able to take on board that information or to process it all in different ways. And it is their story. My daughter, one of the questions I get asked the most, I don't know if you look at these, so these are my children. So these are the characters here are my children. This, a little bit, no, it is me. My husband, of sorts. But these are my actual children. And what you might notice is this hair is a true representation of my daughter's hair, which clearly has come from nobody. So the biggest question that I get asked is, isn't her hair, look, her hair's beautiful. Isn't her hair beautiful? Where did the curls come from? It's the question I get asked the most. Because I haven't got curls, my husband hasn't got curls, immediate people around us haven't got any curls, and it's the question I get asked the most. And it's funny, isn't it? So again, I have an answer, and I just just always somewhere down the line, I just give an answer, and nobody seems to question it, because again, if it's somebody that I don't know or don't just interact with, but it's very telling. So my daughter was not great with the hairdresser, and then we had COVID. So we hadn't been to the hairdressers for ages, and we joined a new hairdressers last year, and I think we've maybe been 4 times. Of course, every single time we go, the hairdresser talks about the curls, because she can't work out by looking at me. She's never seen my husband or any of the other family. But she can't work out where the curls have come from, and they are massive. Her curls are massive. She's got like full-on beautiful curly hair. It's gorgeous, and she actually likes. I say she likes it now, but I'm sure there'll be a point where this hair straighteners will come out, and she'll want to give them a go. So every time we go to the hairdressers says, "Where were the curls from again?" And I just say, "Oh, it's just down the line somewhere." She loves them now. That's good, isn't it? And that's it. And again, you can just get into that. It's true. It's come from down her birth line. It's not a false statement. It's just I haven't said that bit. But at no point did I think, I'm like, right, so do I now, because she's asking us every time, do I now phone the hairdresser on a separate occasion and tell her my daughter is adopted and that's where the hair has come from? Or do I just let this thing go along the way? So you've got to just kind of gauge where you go. In all honesty, I thought, maybe is it getting a bit awkward now? Like she's asking us for the 5th time now and I'm giving the same answer and it's all going, so do I now, at that point, is that now something I need to deal with? And in all honesty, I just forgot, I forgot. And then the last time, and my daughter's never mentioned it, and this is about owning the story. So then the last time we went to the hairdressers, she said, I just, these gorgeous hairs, and my daughter just said, I'm adopted, and that's when my hair, and I think my birth mother had quite curly hair. And that was it. It was just, it's done. Now, she owned that, so in each time that we'd gone, but it took her 4 or 5 times to feel that she wanted to share it, not me. I can deal with that. I can deal with the fobbing off if I need to in that way. But in that moment, she just sat and she literally says it in the calmest way, as if, I'd like to wear a pink t-shirt today. I was adopted. She's just got this way about her. And she just said it. She owned when that information came. And I'm like, it wasn't awkward enough for me to feel I needed to. It wasn't anything medical. It wasn't anything that needed anything that would impact on anything. And I just gave the line that I gave, because I have a line for each thing that I feel might come about at some time, until I can see that they're ready to do that too. And that was just lovely. And that was quite telling for me, because that was the moment when I thought, well, I didn't need to tell her at any point, or tell everybody, because we are just a family. Yes, we've got lots and lots of bits and bobs behind us. I never really call myself an adoptive mum. I am just a mum, and that's just the nature of it. But of course, I've got time on our side, and I've got hindsight behind us about, you know, how all these things are. So I just thought that was quite in telling that she chose that moment. Well, then of course we did have from the hairdresser the next one, the inappropriate. No, it wasn't inappropriate, but of course you've also got to gauge as well. It's not always fair on the other person, because they don't know how to react and what to say. And it's not that I've never been someone, you know. And she was like, oh, wow. And then she actually said, which I thought was lovely. She said, you've never told me that before. And I thought that was lovely, because she was like, she acknowledged that my daughter had told her at the time that she felt was right. Obviously my daughter's 10, so it's, you know. So I thought that was lovely. And she went, and then she did do a couple of, oh wow, that's lovely, and that's amazing. But yes, it is, so that's fine. And she did choose the chosen word, which I'm not a fan of. So, but you know, you go with that. But on the whole, it worked out really nicely. So I guess the point of that long story is that you've got to gauge, you know, just learn. I don't know that there's a pressure to get it all out there and tell everybody and do. And I'm sure that's not the message that comes across. But you sometimes feel like you should, that you've got to make an explanation, or you have to do it, but have things prepared and have things ready. So I think that's probably talked enough about my little, our how our little family came together. And as I said, I suppose those were the key things. Is that I would just like to, if I've got just to read out something to you, if I can. It wasn't something that I did. I picked up on this. It came out a few years ago. I don't know whether or not. I don't know if I can read it with my very focus. I picked up on this a couple of years ago now, because there was a programme that came out, and you might be familiar with it. It's the Netflix documentary, the Babies documentary on Netflix. So I don't know if this is something that. So my caveat to this is that if you have been through an experience like we did, you won't necessarily want to watch this programme. But it is basically, it shows the development of a child from being birth. So it does show images of birth and but this came on a post, and I'm just going to read it to you, because it was the thing, as a parent, through adoption, that has made the biggest impact on me. Okay, so it was from someone, and she was called Born From My Heart. That's the Instagram thingy. She said, and this is what she says. I started watching the Babies documentary on Netflix. So she's an adopted mum, just to put the context. On Netflix today. In the first episode, scientists did a study on what happens in parents' brains when we fall in love with our babies. They compared the bonding hormones that are released in the body when you have a baby biologically to the hormones released in adoptive couples. I don't usually cry over scientific research, but this one confirmed something I've always known. They show that the amygdala, the primitive mama bear part of the brain, that lets us know that we are responsible for another life and makes us hypervigilant in protecting, loving and nurturing our child, is opened during pregnancy, childbirth and nursing, and remains active for the rest of your life. But the most surprising discovery of these scientists was that they found, when they studied the same part of the brain in adoptive parents who became primary caregivers to a child from different biology, their amygdala was open and activated to the same extent as a biological parent. The bonding hormones in both types of parents were identical. Their research proved that becoming a parent had nothing to do with biology or having a baby, and everything to do with simply choosing to love and care for a child for the rest of your life. It's the choice to parent that makes you one. As someone who never thought I'd get the chance to be a mother, there isn't a discovery out there that feels more important than this one. And that was the most hard-hitting thing that I've ever read. And actually, the study was for, they did it in different groups, and they did it for same-sex male couples as well, and they did it to fathers, and they did it in exactly the same way. And whether or not you were a mother or a father, this opens in your brain through the biological sense if you've given birth, or whether or not you adopted your parent. And it hit me more than anything that I could ever imagine. And I'm sorry if that made it a little bit to anybody, but I just wanted to say that because I can't tell you how many times I would have questioned myself and whether or not this was the right thing. And I don't want to end on the sad bit, but I hope this is a good thing. I want to try and get the good message out there. It's about 15 minutes in on this programme, but I said I'm not recommending people please be, because but it does show obviously the development of the baby from all the way through. Lots of people have actually watched it, but that part of it was the most significant thing that I knew, because I would often think, am I going to love this child? Am I going to know what to do with this child? Am I going to know how to protect this child and whatever? And the answer is yes. And not just because I can say from hindsight, and yes, I've been through it and lived it, but because the scientists, and there were 36 of them, I think, there were 37 out, and they did all the research and thought different things. So I just wanted to end on that note.